Hey, it's exciting having a flick through some of your stuff and reading through your research, getting ready for tonight's chat, to be reminded of how much better a lot of the issues in and around the world are going than what so many of us expect or so many of us perceive. What do you think is causing such a massive gap between the reality and our perception of how we think things are?
Well, when we've been looking at how people perceive the world, we see that especially when it comes to human development, it seems to be totally underestimated the progress that is going on. And we've been thinking about that quite a lot, actually. Why can that be? But I do really think it's sort of a combination of a few different things. I think one thing is that we're driven to be interested in bad things happening, and we are looking, whatever new information we get tend to be negative information. And if someone is talking about positive things, I think we're less likely to listen in and remember. So we get the proportions of the things we have in our minds, I think, are skewed towards bad things. And then I think we also it's pretty new that we have access to data. And when it comes to human development, there are a pretty long time series that shows that it has been a steady and pretty slow progress, and that never fits for the news. When is the time to report something that is going steadily and slowly, in a positive direction? So that I think is an effect as well. And then and then I think, I mean, for all of us, it's important to keep track of bad things happening. So we know if it's going to be a weather catastrophe in the neighborhood, we really need to know that. While if it's a weather catastrophe, I don't know, 500 miles away, we might still be interested, but we don't have to do anything. So I think we're wired towards, is there something we need to act on? And then basic storytelling, the basic storytelling problem that we love juicy stories and we tend to remember those. I think that is also part of the case.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think it was Andrew Huberman on Rich Roll's podcast a few years ago speak about how the favorite headspace that a human can spend their time in, or our most enjoyed headspace, is not happiness or joy, but mild irritation. It seems to be the place that we tend to go back to most
Yeah.
naturally. And I see that's true whenever you turn on the TV. And as you say, like when you're looking at
Mhm.
news headlines, and from the news perspective, you can understand, because if that is true, that mild irritation is what sort of entertains us, then naturally, like, the bang for the buck of sponsorship dollars would be to post
Yeah.
more of those stories. But I guess if you're just simply posting stories which are getting attention based on a catchy headline, it's very unlikely that we're going to have a real accurate perception of what's actually going on.
Yeah. And also, I don't know. I mean, we have been showing people a lot of positive data they haven't seen or haven't thought about or haven't remembered. Not really clear what is the most major problem. But also it's a hard thing actually communicate positive things happening, because I think we're from school we're wired to be critical thinkers, and I think we wrongly confuse being thinking critically with being critical, being negative, being saying no to things. So I very often have the feeling when you're trying to say something that has been a positive trend, people assume that you are against, that you don't want to see problems, or that you are really, really naive and stupid, because you should always come with something, sort of counter the argument with something smart, and usually that is something negative. That's the way to look smart, and I think that also plays in. But
That's true.
yeah,
Do you feel like is that just a human a human symptom, or is that something you notice particularly? Because when you say that, I
yeah,
automatically think of like a professor at a university and trying to
yeah.
impress him. And I mean, it seems like an easy go to. Just say the negative thing and
Yes.
start to appear more intelligent.
Exactly. And I think that is the structure of the current school system, sort of an old fashioned pyramid where we used to have the knowledge only at the top, and it was inaccessible on lower levels, and you had to achieve knowledge stepwise. I do think with the new technology and that data is available online and everyone can Google, especially the young ones are pretty good at that. I think the old hierarchy for knowledge will disappear, and I don't think the young ones now will accept that, like sort of the old university structure to the same extent as the rest of us.
Yeah,
So I
it's
think that
interesting.
will change.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. I was just
No
going to
worries.
say it's really interesting to watch it from a broader perspective. I'm not sure how much Australian news makes its way onto Swedish television, but at the moment there's a bill that our government's trying to pass around misinformation and how to monitor that most effectively. And
Yeah,
most of my friends, myself included, look at that and go, well, you really haven't proved yourselves to be really effective arbiters of what's real and what's not over the last couple of years. And so a lot of people are getting upset because they're like, okay, well, if it did just used to be you that had the reins of what people could believe based on what it is that you've stamped the approval on, all
yeah,
of a sudden them losing grip of that's become a little bit of a tension point between the Australian public and the Australian government. And I'm not sure if that's something that's happening all around the world. It seems to be like this idea of censorship and a more authoritarian government, or at least a push towards that, seems to be a real discussion
yeah,
amongst. When I say that, I'm thinking like America, Australia,
yeah.
Canada, maybe New Zealand.
Yeah, no, no, I think we see the same here as well. Maybe not as much because we're just a tiny country with few people. So the extent is not as massive. But I do. What we have figured out during the past years, which I think is pretty interesting, it's a lot of talk about fake news, misinformation, and so on, and that gives an idea that all of us are well informed, but then someone comes and sneaks into our minds and tries to manipulate the way we think in a more criminal kind of way. We have tested the general public in several countries and on basically what they know about the world by asking pretty trivial but ABC questions about basically everything you can imagine based on the UN SDG, the UN goals. So we've been going through every single indicator and tested, just trying to get a map of what people seem to be wrong about. And what is interesting by that is to see that when the sort of trusted official data, people are pretty wrong about that too. And we tested teachers, we tested journalists, politicians, and they are usually as wrong as the general public. And when I say wrong on a question, it's like 10% of them get it correct. It's those kinds of numbers, or 5% get it correct. If we have a question where people score really, really good, it might be up to a third of the people answering that gets it correct. And we talk about ABC questions. I mean, it's not rocket science in that sense. And I mean, of course, we ask questions to people who don't, they will not know the answers in many cases. We know that. But we can see that when they are guessing, they are usually skewing the guesses the same way. So they skew it very often towards the more negative answer alternative. And I think what is interesting with this is when we think that people are misinforming us, and that's what causes the problem, but that we used to know everything by heart from, as a standard, the baseline, then we have a very hard time to solve the problem. Because if we're wrong about almost everything, anyways, the ones managing to misinform us will be just a fraction. So maybe we should think about the bigger problem that we tend to be wrong about everything, anyways, which which is bigger, but it has a completely different solution because there is no criminal trying to do something, but anyways, we still get it wrong, right? So I
Yeah.
think that is a very interesting and pretty unsolved question.
Yeah. So when you speak about that from like just for the sake of example, like a government official's perspective, trying to
Yeah,
navigate, all right, how do we solve this
yeah,
just abundance of information that the public has access to, and what it is they can see or what they can't see or whatever is, like, however you like to phrase it. It always sounds so strange when you say that out loud, but I hope that makes sense. Like, you know what I'm trying to say. It's a problem for them because, like, the idea is, are you saying that they don't have a clear idea of where the public sits in terms of what they believe anyway? So trying to monitor and maybe coerce them in a particular direction is like for the sake of trying to have a plan in place. It's going to be difficult to plan for something you're not 100% sure. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
kind of just waffling, but it's a weird thought to
yes,
put your head around.
yeah, but I think we have a situation where we have basically the ones making the decisions for all of us, the teachers, the journalists, the government people, right? Uh, if they usually believe that they are right because they are highly educated and smart people and they have good intent. So they want to do good and they're doing good, right? But when we test their facts, even within their own field, very often they are wrong about the. I mean, of course, they know the nitty gritty details of something very particular they are working on. But when they get questions that are like close, they usually get those wrong. So I think we have a situation where we have the experts believing that they are correct and that they not only know what the facts are like, but also that they can understand how people perceive it. And usually, I think they perceive that the general public might be wrong. That's okay because the experts will communicate to them and make decisions for them, wise decisions. But what we point at is that even they seem to be wrong very often. So I think the problem here is when we use our gut feeling or when we discuss with colleagues and friends, trying to make sure that we are on the right track and have the right information, we will confirm each other in a sort of a similar kind of misunderstood society. And of course, I mean, we work with the dullest possible data that no one. I don't assume that people will go to the UN website and just browse around and enjoy. I mean, people don't do that. Of course, I get that, but the thing is to see that people are so much more. I mean, if it's basically like this, when we ask questions that are ABC questions, if they were just guessing, they should end up on a third correct because everything, they should by random get every third correct or so. So by not reading the questions, they would end up around 3 out of 9 correct all the time, like 33% correct. But humans don't end up there. Humans usually end up further down and get lower results than random because when we start guessing, there is something going on that is a systematic way of reasoning. And I do think, I mean, I don't think we can solve anything. We're just a tiny nonprofit, but we can point at it. Very few people can because we are independent, so we can go and point and show this to decision makers in many different fields, and hopefully get a few of them to get the sense that this is something that is truly problematic, and they might need to do something with their routines for how they use information when making decisions. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe we can achieve something like that. And I know it sounds, when I talk about it, it might even sound a little bit like a conspiration, like all the experts are wrong. But it seems like on these kind of questions, a lot of people are. And it's pretty trivial to change, right? Because the data exists nowadays. And the people in decision making positions are smart people, so they can easily change as soon as they understand that if they use their gut feeling, most likely it will take them wrong. So I mean, that's basically the only thing they need to do.
Can you
The-
can you talk a little more to the idea of that systematic, terrible success rate that we have when it comes to multiple choice questions? Like, could you say if you're just picking a number, or if you're picking a letter A, B, or C, a third of
yeah,
those would be right. But there's something deeper, or there's some brainstorming error that's taken place when we're trying to work our way through, like maybe
yeah.
not simple, but simple at
I,
least on paper.
Yeah, I mean, so what I think what I'm trying to say that if I just gave you 6 questions, all ABC questions, you didn't read you didn't read them, you were just picking a few A's, a few B's, and a few C's, you know. If you did that and we were looking at your results, you might just hit the correct question on some of them without knowing anything about the question. While if you started to read the questions, you will start to resonate with yourself. What makes sense here? What is the situation? And then you start to think and you start to pick uh, the alternative that you believe is the most correct one, right? I mean, that's how we do things. And when we start doing that, then we get worse results than what random would get. That's basically the problem, right?
Yeah, because it's becoming an emotional thing rather than like a
Yeah,
factual thing, or
yeah, and we use the fractions of things we might remember at the moment, and we try to make sense of the world, thinking about what we heard in news, what we learned in school. But I mean, what we learned in school is probably totally outdated, even and most likely it was not a covering picture where we got the overview. I mean, it was usually pretty snippety, right, when we talked about the world in school, and it was a long time ago. So the world has changed. We have forgotten most of what we learned. So I mean, in that case, we don't have so much to rely on. And when we look at the news, we see all the dramatic stuff that has happened, which might be correct information, but it doesn't give the overview because a lot of things are also going well, but we don't see them. So we usually, I think we have that skewness in the
yeah,
way we think. Yeah.
yeah. Are there any particular examples that people are most consistently wrong about? Like if they're asked a certain question about a certain issue,
Yeah.
one that stands out as being, "Oh, you're way off."
I have I was actually for a lecture. I was testing a group. I will not say which group at this case in this case, but it was a like a official organization. I was testing their knowledge, and I had picked a number of questions in different, a little bit different fields. But one of the questions that they got scored very wrong on, and that the general public usually score wrong on, is, for example, a question about how many women have been like presidents of their countries. And then they get three alternatives. I can see if I can find the question. Do you want to have the real question here
Please,
now?
this could humble me in front of the audience for sure. Ask
Yeah.
me.
Basically, I ask you this one. Up to 1990, 22 countries in the world had been led by a female head of state or government. What is the number today? So in 1990, it used to be 22, right? And
Mhm.
now comes the alternatives. A, 39, B, 59, or C, 89.
Okay, well, basically, just to continue the trend of what we've been talking about, I'm locking in C, 89.
And you're correct. But when we ask this in 32 countries, and the average of those answers on those in those countries was actually 4%. Got it correct. And in Australia, it was 3% who got it correct. Let's see if we have Sweden here. No, yeah, and Sweden was also 3% correct. So as you can understand, pretty low. And the group I tested and I was looking at results yesterday night, they scored 4% correct on that one. So I mean, we usually get those numbers, and that is pretty representative when it comes to positive trends for women in general. Whether it's how many girls go to school, or female CEOs, or presidents, or those kinds of questions, it's super much underestimated the positive trend. And I think very often it's because we confuse, if we say the lowest number, it sounds like, I think we confuse the fact, the number, with an intent. Basically, if I pick the low number or the high number, then it seems like I'm overestimating the progress, as if I don't care about uh, women rights in a way, right? So I think people are doing those kinds of they are adding like some ideology when they are answering, because they don't want to sound like neglecting big problems. So I think that is also playing a part.
Yeah, and that gender role in especially the corporate structure, it would be a fairly delicate conversation to have, obviously, because I know
Yeah,
there's still plenty of debate going on around that. So I'd
of
imagine
course.
in that particular sphere, yeah, it'd be really
Yeah,
quite.
and I mean they are right in a way because women are still very underrepresented. So I mean that is correct. But they but when something is underrepresented, it's very hard to see that you have a rapid change going on, even if it is in smaller numbers. But it's something is happening that will change it pretty dramatically, most likely. So that
Yeah.
was one example. But those kinds of positive trends, people tend to underestimate quite a lot.
Yeah, sure. And so when we just to continue with that conversation a little, because it's an interesting one. Like when we speak about women being underrepresented in certain areas, like are there particular fields that are the real standouts from your perspective with the numbers that you've seen that are some of the key areas? Because I feel like whenever we talk about this particular topic, I can see how it gets messy because
Yes.
a lot of the time from obviously it's a political conversation, it's an
Yeah.
emotional conversation, it's a yeah, there's facts and there's feelings, and there's also I often hear people speak about, okay, yeah, well, there's an underrepresentation of, just to use our example, of women in this particular area, but then we've got to look at the flip side of that and say, yeah, but like in nursing or whatever, I don't know if that's a good example, there's like an
Yeah.
overrepresentation. And so even saying that, you've got to be careful because people are like,
Yeah.
oh, what are you trying to say? You trying to say you don't care? Not at
It's
all. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. But I see even
yeah.
asking the question how delicate it can be.
Yes. And yeah, and I think that that sense of I think people uh, they sort of feel that delicacy in their own heads, and that affects how they answer the questions in a
Yeah.
way. I think. Yeah, so I think it's something going on not only between humans but also inside us, that we're self regulating in a way. Yeah. So
It's really
definitely.
true. It's really true. I mean, it was as obvious as I'd ever felt just asking that question then, because I can imagine people hearing it going, "Oh, Tyson an asshole." Didn't know that's
Yeah.
how he felt. No. I want to go back to something you said about school earlier, and I think feel free to correct my quote if I'm wrong, but you were saying that for a lot of us, just the way that we're taught in school often leads us towards a negative bias or a negative perspective on some big issues. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think it is about is it the structure of school? Is it the lessons? Because obviously all of these I realize are, you can go a mile deep in each conversation and still have more to say.
Yeah. No, no, I mean, I would say once again, it's just speculations from my side, but I do think it does something with us when we're being, for so many years, I mean, in let's say 12 years at least, we're going every single day to a place where someone is looking at everything we do and put marks whenever we are wrong. So I think we're getting cautious of being wrong, and we are very eager to be seen in the hierarchy for doing right, because it's important for us to get the grades and behave right and answer correctly. And I think it might have an effect that we're not very good at reasoning or thinking, but we're pretty good at trying to avoid to be embarrassed by the teacher or our classmates. So I think it creates a mindset that might not necessarily be uh, very well adopted, at least not now when we can find information easily, or much more easily. It's still cumbersome to go through data, of course, but now at least we have access to a lot of it for free online, so it's easy to find, still a bit hard to make sense of. But that is
Yeah,
something we will have to solve by becoming more data literate. And maybe the skills for data literacy might not come from school primarily, but from actually being exposed to a lot of data, most likely, I guess, online in
yeah,
in areas we care about. For instance, if you're interested in let's say soccer, most likely you will look at the scores and visualizations around that and start to get your head around how to read bigger sets of data. And I think school is usually uh, a little bit behind, and that is a new thing because information used to be locked into churches and schools and academia, and now you have information basically everywhere. So the exclusiveness of the way we have structured our learning hierarchies, I'm not sure that is going to be as important when we move forward. So,
Yeah,
so, so things will happen, I think, probably too slow and frustratingly slow, but I do think it will change. And I do think a lot of the change will come from young people not accepting the ridiculous ways we have been doing, information, basically how we've been doing teaching uh, for the past, I don't know, let's say 500 years, pretty the same all the time. But now, when the kids can find the information uh, outside of school quite often, quite easily, um, I think the power of the learning hierarchies are getting lowered in a way.
yeah, for sure. I wonder this, especially in America, like you see the financial situations of some of the college graduates who, they graduate 200, 300, even $500,000 in debt, depending on their course, how many years they've been there. And like the ability to justify that cost and how much, that's cost you in comparison to what the career that you've just got
Yeah,
yourself a degree
yeah,
in is going to pay you back starts to look pretty difficult to
yeah,
justify it. Like, I guess that's the rescaffolding that has to take place around, okay, well, like how does someone become a qualified doctor versus how does someone become a, a philosopher or an art student or whatever it might be?
yeah,
There's obviously
yeah,
different levels of entry or qualifications
yeah.
based on what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think there is a frustrating. I mean, I do really understand the reason why we want to have an educated population. That is a good thing, right? And many people love to learn, so that is a good thing too. But I do think we will sort of end up in a problem when we downgrade all the occupations that a society actually needs, and everyone. I mean that I'm not sure it's a good thing for a society that everyone gets a philosophy degree and no one goes into sanitation and plumbing, right? It doesn't really work. So we do need to balance that somehow. And I don't think society need as many theoretical thinkers as we might end up with, because it's fun and it's meaningful for the person, and it's interesting to deep into a subject. But as a society, we need a lot of other skills too. I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah,
So
for
yeah.
sure. It's a good point. Do you feel like that is the direction that things are potentially going at the moment? Like there's a lot of theoretical students without the lack of a better description, like the substance behind, like what a plumber or a farmer or someone else might have. It seems to be a trend that as you can get access to so much of this information online, why go to pay for it when you can just you can every day is like a philosophy conversation or a political conversation here in Australia. You just go down the street for your coffee and the
Yeah,
barista's got his opinion, the
yeah,
the local
yeah,
baker's got his opinion. I'm in a
yeah,
small town.
yeah,
You can't go too far without hearing the thoughts of everyone on the main street. But yeah, there's definitely a trend towards theory. But here's the thing that often stands out to me as well. I've got theories about things that I'm never going to make practical steps on. Like and I guess this is the abundance of information that we have access to. You can see American news or Canadian news or there's world news, and I can have my opinions like, oh, this is what I would do, this is what I think, this is where they're going wrong. But me
hmm
filling my head with all my theories and speculations and thoughts does absolutely nothing to see any practical change on the ground on these issues. And there seems to be a lot of armchair critics and commentators
yeah.
in comparison to how many people are actually getting anything done.
I mean, yes, I think there is, and I think I mean maybe in one way maybe it should be, but we need still to solve how we can get the sort of practical things of society to to roll meanwhile, because otherwise we will end up in a mess, right? And
Yeah.
and I think that we have downgraded a lot of the practical occupations far too much. That I actually think. And I think that doesn't really make sense, because it is a true art to be able to make, I don't know, build a house or whatever you're going to do. It's a lot of, I mean, in very practical work tasks, there's a lot of fascinating knowledge that that is important that people have, right? And
Yeah.
those comes from actually solving real problems in real life. I mean, I'm a typical example of one of those, just sitting, thinking, and talking, right? So I mean, I'm being a bit self-critical here. And I mean, if the Swedish university system wasn't as well funded and as generous, where I could actually, study whatever I like, and without getting the as big debts as in the US, I could actually decide and do whatever I wanted to do, and my parents didn't have a say, because I could work on that on my own.
Yeah.
I think that is a major reason why uh, why I have dared doing what we have been doing, because that was not a clear career path. So I mean, I am one of those taking all those courses that might on a bigger level not be, uh, so for society as a whole it might not be smart they shouldn't have too many like me, right? That that doesn't work in a way. But I'm happy, because for me it was of course very fun, and it will be fun for others as well. So I mean, yeah, how
It's,
how
it's
can I how can I not do the fun stuff, right? So
For
yeah,
sure. I'm glad you're doing the heavy lift. I'm glad you're doing the heavy lifting and collating the data, because for me, that's not the fun part. But sitting on the website and answering the questions, I mean, I find that enjoyable. And it's enjoyable as well because constantly I'm shocked at how wrong I am, but in
yeah,
the right way. I'm wrong in the fact that things are better than I'd anticipated, which is always really nice to see. It is a unique field that you're in, though. I love it. My wife asked me, so she's read Factfulness as well.
mhm,
I can't remember the year I read it for the first time. It was a few years ago now. And we were both like, this is just so inspiring, because I felt like the news headlines, social media,
yeah,
everything was, we're going down the drain, everything's worse.
yeah,
And I've noticed this trend in myself. I'm 37 and I can easily look back to the good old days of when I was 10 years old. And I noticed my grandparents used to look back at the good old days when they were 10 years old. I'm like, okay, it can't all just be the good old days. Like, surely, like, there's like a crossover point here where we're both living in some pretty high times. But
yeah,
we love that. And I was just explaining to my wife that I was going to be talking to you, and she's like, "Oh, what is it she does?" And I was like, "It's actually a brilliant question. I don't know how exactly to explain it." And so my biggest challenge, just getting ready to sit down to talk to you, was trying to figure out like what is the title that you give yourself? Because I know you run a non-profit and you collate data. But
yeah.
how do you explain that to people? Because I imagine it's a question that gets thrown out a lot.
Yeah, and I have to admit that I have changed my answers over the years, and I'm still not happy with the answers, because I mean, as a starter, I think we've been working with this undefined thing for about 25 years. What we've done all those years have been basically trying to make the world easier to understand by using time series data. I mean, that we have done all the time in different ways. But then, I mean, maybe I should answer the question that when I was a teen, I wanted to become a photographer, and I was studying social science at the university. So I was studying photography and social science. So I spent 5 years at the university, and some 3 years at the university, two before, to actually become a professional photographer. So that you could say could be one of the occupations I got in a way, but I never worked as a photographer, because I was studying social science at the same time, because I felt it was interesting to combine. And one of the projects we've done, the Dollar Street project, is sort of a perfect combination of those, basically trying to explain the world the income differences in the world by using photography from inside of homes on different income levels globally. So that there I managed to combine those two, I would say elegantly. But in all the other projects, I would say my main thing is that I like to clean out a lot of information. Basically, you can say like this. I work with my husband. I used to work with my father-in-law. My father-in-law, he was a professor, medical doctor, and so on. So that was pretty clear. He wanted to teach his students. My husband is a wild brain, and he comes up with a trillion ideas. And I like to develop things I haven't seen. So Hans's frustrations, my father-in-law, my husband Ola's trillion ideas to actually solve some of Hans's problems that he was explaining, and me being like frustrated and irritated and angry, trying to. I can see the vision. I love to be visionary and dream up things that doesn't exist. I love that. So I'm part innovator, something like that. But I like to clean out the mess from the ideas, from all those trillion ideas my husband gets. I like to clean out and remove most of the ideas, and the ones we keep, I like to continue to dive into and clean and organize and make them, make them understandable. You could say. So everything that comes down to simplifying, cleaning out on visionary thinking, I would say is my main passion, and I've been doing that in many different ways.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're like that outside of work as well? Like in your house, is what you just explained represented by the clutter he brings in versus the order you try and bring into place, or is this
I'm
unique to work?
Yeah, I think I would love to have. So I think I'm pretty good at that at work. I'm super bad at it in private. I'm very disorganized, cluttery. I'm bad at tidying up. I'm good at starting things, not very good at finalizing them. It's better, I would say, work wise, because there if it's something visual or if it's a thought that is not clear, then I get very irritated and I need to finalize it until I enjoy it, you could say. So yeah, so I like to dive into super complex information and make it see if it's possible to make it as easy, so easy, so my kids, when they were in middle school, can easily understand what it's all about. So
Yeah.
basically,
Oh,
go that whole distance. That's what I really really enjoy, and I'm still trying to figure out how I can apply that skill in my private life as well. Hasn't happened yet, but
yeah.
maybe there will one day.
Let me know if you figure it out because I could do with some tips as well. It's interesting to hear you've come from a photography background because one thing that struck me, I was looking at your website earlier, and there was I can't remember if it was just like a welcome video, but it was a welcome video, and it showed a moving chart of like where particular issues are today in
Yeah,
comparison to where they were 5, 10, 15 years ago. Some of them were moving forward, some of them were too slow, some of them were moving backward. And I'm
yeah,
like, man, it's such a from a numbers perspective, you would assume that this is purely like a maths geek kind of job. This is somewhere where someone just loves numbers. But watching that, you can see it is a very creative process as well. Like, so it I mean,
yeah,
I guess that's a credit to you guys for combining those two factors, because the fact that you came from a world of photography sort of doesn't surprise me, because like to make this information digestible and enjoyable for people to see, it has to
yeah.
have some level of creativity involved to help people like
Mm.
myself who honestly would never have thought I would be interested in this topic, but I am based on those kind of things. It's a unique
Yeah,
blend.
I'm glad to hear. Yeah, so basically, I would say I realized that I was interested in the topics, but I hate tables of data. still. So I think most of the things we've done is out of hatred, right? Because I get very, very irritated that it's usually presented in a way that makes the what I think the interesting information totally undigestible.
Yeah.
So I think we shouldn't blame people for not using the data. Of course they won't. Not only they don't see why they should use it, and then if they try and go to to the official sources and see the data, I mean it's still very dull because it comes from that what I was explaining, the academic tradition, where I would say where the people high up in the hierarchy, no one has been uh, uh, no one has forced them to start to make their information a little understandable. That is not something that is going on in the university structure. They can present information however, because the readers are those who have like unlimited attention and interest. So they sit there, and I guess that's how you how you sort people, that those who can stay at the university are those who can accept very bad presented information, even though the information itself might be very important and interesting, but there is no tradition of making the information accessible. So I think the whole research community is missing out on a lot of smart people because, frankly, they can think of more interesting things to do than reading those horrific papers, right? So
Yeah.
I do think that, uh, I like, and it might also be a little bit of a. I think also I have in me. I never really liked uh, authority and working and having someone tell me what to do. So I think I'm in a way I like to go around and poke on prestigious organizations and people that are much smarter than myself, but pointing out that, hey, there is something here that doesn't really make sense because you're scoring as bad as everyone else. There might be a problem here, right? So I think that is part of the case, trying to liberate the information so that people can use and understand it. I think it's important, but also it is a bit fun to to poke on the prestigious organizations.
For
Yeah,
sure.
honestly.
I can imagine that's very true. Actually, now might be the perfect time to ask this question because I was wondering, when it comes to collating the data, obviously there'd be so many different points of data that you can go to, or so many different places you can go and get data. And obviously, depending on, uh, it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to me that at the moment there's like a political arrow which strikes through the heart of so much information. And so some information, it seems that we're offered, it seems more like that information is going to be tailored to suit like a political agenda or a political mindset. So if you go to CNN in America, for example, it's going to be far more liberal. If you go to Fox, it's going to be
Yeah.
far more conservative. Um, they're talking about the same stories in very different ways. And I always find that a really difficult thing to navigate because CNN's obviously coming from a like, oh no, where's your heart? And Fox News is like, no, this is like we got to stand up for what we've built. And it's
Mm,
like, oh, you both seem to be making good points in some level, but the way you're coming at it is just completely
yeah.
different. So, like, how is it that you assess credible data and what is just like a what do you call it? Like a tainted data set based on certain political beliefs or whatever else.
So
Does that make
so
sense?
yeah, I think
Yeah.
definitely. So I think most of the data we use comes from the big organizations that collect data from governments basically, and usually it's data from the World Bank or the UN system, and quite often they are actually about the same data. They might have the same source in many cases, but that is the baseline information that we have always used. And then in some cases we use data from some research institutes, uh, and there are certain data of the very, very long time series that we have constructed by combining data sets from different research places, right? If you go very far back in time, then it will be people in history that have been doing the time series, maybe. And then we have to combine it with the World Bank theory. So we have done some work internally as well. But most of the data comes from the big organizations. And that data is supposed to be neutral. It's supposed to be not only it's like government data from countries, but then it has also gone through a revision process within those big organizations to make sure that the data seems as okay as it can be, right? No data will ever be perfect, but those are pretty much covering. When we've been asking all those fact questions, we have for a big portion of the questions we've asked, or big, not maybe not the biggest, but around 500 of those questions, we have actually we constructed the questions using already published official statistics from the big organizations. And after we published or after we got the results, if people were truly wrong about this question, then we reached out to 3 researchers in the field. And we're trying to find researchers with different political ideology, asking them, would you use these numbers from this data source if you were going to talk about this? Do you think we constructed the question so it makes sense? Do you think the answer alternatives are reasonable? You know, and if any one of those was objecting, saying like, oh no, I would never use that source. Sure, it's the official source, but it's a guesswork or whatever, then we have removed those questions. So out of the 500 we've tested very, very seriously that way, 9% we got shooten down by experts. So we're assuming that of all the questions we've asked, even if we use official data sources, the research community would most likely shoot down somewhere around 10%. But the
Yeah.
interesting thing is we use already published official statistics that everyone else uses, like without double checking whether those numbers are the best or not. So I do think we have a pretty good idea about the data standards and the data quality. So we have you can say that we work with a big network of researchers, but we try to work uh, not in close collaboration because they have the academic way of doing things that is a very slow way. And we try to keep our freedom and our integrity. So we work on the side, but we try to involve them to make sure that we're not doing anything stupid.
That's really cool. That's really cool because I mean, like over the years of doing something like this, I can imagine you've become more and more trained to be maybe like politically neutral or whatever you want to say, neutral to the
Yeah,
subject for the sake of
yeah.
getting the answers. But was that like, is that something that you've had to develop? Or is that something you were
So
passionate about, or
I
did you feel
want to,
coming in originally like your emotions were like, ah, no,
yeah.
this is rubbish, I can't have this.
No, no, but I would say honestly, that has been the intent all the time because we were very frustrated that people are uh, we had the sense that people were having very like intense arguments, but without having the facts in the matter, because you have like all these ideology, clashes. So very early on, we had the feeling that we need to make the neutral data. I mean, as neutral as it can get. But what sort of humanity considers being the neutral information? We need to make that available because ideally, of course, people with different political opinions should at least have a look on the same information. And then, of course, their ideologies will take them in different directions when they think about if there is a problem they are looking at. They will probably both agree that it might be a problem, but they will have different ways of solving it, right? Should it be, have a smaller state or have a stronger state? That might be 2 different ways of approaching a system where we can see that, I don't know, kids fall out of school too early. Well, we need to have a stronger state that blah, blah, blah. No, we need to privatize and make sure the competition solves it. I mean, that will be 2 completely different solutions. But when we see that people are wrong about the baseline, they don't have the facts. And the facts they will get from within their ideology bubbles in a way. Then I think we have a problem because then we're just trying to shoot each other down. But quite often, even if we are on different places in our ideologies, quite often, I mean, we are closer than we assume, I would say. If there is a problem of poverty, for instance, in the city we live, I bet most people would feel that that is a true problem and it should be solved.
Yeah.
And if we weren't just debating as intensely, thinking that we were standing in a different corner, I think very often we could actually find ways of doing things together, trying to solve things. I mean, it's sort of a lot of problems are more on a common sense kind of level, even though we have our ideologies. And I think we should, yeah, we should combine information and facts with ideology. I think that would be cool.
Yeah, it would
Not
be
just
cool.
going with ideology.
It's so hard to do, isn't it? It's so
Yeah,
tricky. I was
it
talking
is.
to my wife about this the other day. Like your example's perfect. If you get a conservative and a liberal, and you say, "All right, homelessness is a problem," it's not
Yeah,
like one's going to go, "Yeah, it is," and the other one's going to go, "No, it's not." But yeah,
yeah,
just that tribal attitude
yeah,
of, "Oh, we're in
yeah,
different teams." Like
yeah.
it seems to be a huge obstacle in you navigating how to actually solve a problem like that.
No, and I think the news are actually adding on because that's the way we get tension and interest to things by creating almost the impression that people are standing further away than they actually do. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I noticed that throughout the COVID lockdown period here in Australia was fairly wild, and I remember just seeing online during the time people I completely disagreed with, just saying things that I was like, "Oh, I can't believe you were saying that." And in my head, I'd made this conclusion. I was like, "All right, we just disagree about everything. I can't stand this person." And then I went back out to I do stand up comedy, and I went out to some comedy rooms and I started speaking to a few people that in my
mhm,
mind, based on the status, I was like, "Oh, we've just got nothing in common anymore." We start
mhm,
talking and I go, "Oh, you're actually a lovely person." I was just emotional and angry and,
yeah,
I didn't want to hear what your thoughts were about lockdown or whatever.
yeah,
It was kind of like an eye-opening moment for me
yeah.
because it sort of highlighted to me how quick I am to make a judgment on an entire person based on one particular view they might have.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think we all do that. It's very rapidly, and I think that intensifies as well if we don't meet, if we just stay in our bubbles, because then I think that is key to be. I mean, if we can imagine that even people who are in a political party that we don't agree with, but realizing that they also have good intents most often. I mean, most people have good intents. They want to do
Yeah.
good. And if we all want to do good, then maybe we might also be interested in talking to each other and help each other out doing that. I mean, super, super basic, but I do think we need to remind ourselves about that because it's so easy to just think that I am part of the small group of good guys and all
Yeah.
the others, they are just going out to do evil. I need to, fight them so good wins.
Yeah.
While, I mean, I think it's a bit destructive. I, yeah,
Yeah. Even just hearing you say that, like starting with the intention of most people have good intentions, I feel like
mm,
a shift inside just hearing you say that. Like if you approach every conversation like that, it sounds like a way more promising place to get to like a fruitful outcome than like this guy's a dickhead. I've got to prove him right or wrong or whatever because he's
yeah,
evil. Like where are you going to get with
exactly.
that attitude?
Exactly. And I think for us, on one hand, it's easier, I think, to have that mindset because we're looking at data that is considered to be neutral. So in one way, I think it's an easier way in to think about the ability of talking to people of different political opinions. Uh, but but I mean, we are also fighting the same feeling. I think all of us do that. It's a constant battle, and we're so fast at judging. I mean, it takes a millisecond, and then we're sort of certain that that person can't do anything good, and
Yeah.
and it's sad, right? So I think we need to combat that, and I think one of the major problems with working with data like this is that it's a piece of information that you can hit people with in the head, right? And that doesn't do good either. So the reason why we're testing audiences, even if it sounds a little bit. um, yeah, I don't know, a little bit evil to test people and make them ashamed by being wrong. But I do think it has proven that it has been the only way to get into the heads of people who think that they already know what the world is like. Because otherwise, if you say most people are wrong, everyone will think, of course, I knew that everyone else are stupid. I'm not one of them. One of them. It's they are dumb. So it's sort of increases the image of everyone else being stupid. While
Yeah,
if we test the people we talk to and that person also is getting very bad results, then that logic is not as easy anymore, because I am also part of the group who seem to be wrong on this. I thought I knew what the world was like. Seems like I'm also wrong. And then I, at least for a brief moment, I have to sort of reconsider uh, how much I know about the world. And hopefully a grain of humility will sort of uh, start to grow, that maybe it's worth to double check information, not just trusting the gut feeling.
yeah,
Hopefully, yeah.
that's a really good point. What are you guys working on at the moment? What's the next big project or the next big focus?
Yeah, so basically, for so many years, we have been developing different kinds of data visualization tools where people can browse around in big data sets, so to say. Uh, and we have been doing the book, and now we feel that we need to make a structured coursework, free, of course, but for students on different levels. So it should be a work that sort of summarizes and take the conclusions out of the tools and make storytelling out of the tools we have developed, and we base it on the results we've gotten when we tested the general public, basically to see in the field of the UN goals, what are people most wrong about, and then we try to use our materials to sort of explain those phenomena. So moving closer towards something that a regular teacher can use in the classroom easily. Now, everything has been free all the time, and we have millions of teachers using our material. But I do know that it still demands a little bit of, they need to be brave and they need to have an explorer mindset. And now
Yeah,
we want to make sure that teachers who might not be as brave should also get something they can use.
yeah,
So we're trying to sort of summarize. We have a set of 6 courses that we're going to develop for the sort of the coming year. Maybe it will take a little longer. So that is what I would say. That is our core core work at the moment. Trying to do that.
that's cool. Just before I let you go, when you say brave, what is it about a teacher that would have to be brave to use it?
When you're a teacher, you have very much time constraints, and you have the curriculum you have to follow so that you make sure that your students learn what they should. We offer tools where the teacher can go there, they can explore, they can explain things by using our tools, but it's still, as it's not in the curriculum and as it is something that they need to explore and work with themselves, they have to be brave in the way that if the students ask, but why did you do that, and how did you come up with that conclusion, or the parents might ask, but that doesn't, you cannot see anything about that in the curriculum, and so on. So there
Yeah,
we are a little bit, I mean, on one hand, we are a super complement where they can actually find a lot of information that they really would need for their education, but we want to help them and hold their hand if they feel that it's a little bit overwhelming still.
yeah, that's
It's
cool.
more like that, hand holding.
That's cool. I get the bravery side of things. I used to be, my wife and I both used to be teachers. And
Yeah.
yeah, the parents' wrath is a scary thing from time to time. Like when they
Yes.
come to you and say, "Hey, why didn't my son do maths?" And you
Yeah.
say, because I took them out for sport again, it's not the right answer. It can be quite a scary conversation. So,
Yeah, and I think at least here in Sweden, the parents, I mean the parents' power is. I have some friends who are teachers, and they tell me horrific stories when their kids are when kids in class are being bad students. Basically, the parents come and complain and demand, to get better scores, better grades for their kids, and I mean, it's a weird situation.
for
Mm.
sure. I feel like everyone uses Sweden as the great example of how things could be. Like, I reckon in Australia, whenever someone talks about the schooling system, I
Yeah,
can't even give you an exact example, but I
yeah,
feel it so often people go, no, look at what Sweden is doing.
yeah. So Sweden used to be a very easy to understand system. We only had public schools, and we had the public universities, and everything was free for students always, no matter where you were in the hierarchy. Uh, and now it's getting more and more mixed up. So we get more and more private alternatives, but it's still for the end user, the student, it's still free in the same way. But it starts to be a little bit uh, unclear, the system, because we have several parallel competing systems at the moment,
Yeah.
and school results go down, and there's a bit of a frustration trying to figure out why our school results not sort of improving so much as they should. I don't
Yeah.
know. But I mean, I bet still we are both in countries like have top education if you look in a global perspective. So even when it starts to shake in Sweden, it's minor, right? So
Yeah, it's interesting. I was actually shocked. One question I did just before I got on the phone call with you today on your website was, how many world-class universities does Australia have? And I got this so wrong. I think the answers were like 8, 21, and 34. And I clicked 8, and I think it
yeah,
was 34. It sort of blew my mind. So yeah, you're right. It
yeah.
is interesting. But hey, I got my eye on the clock, and I told you an hour, so I don't want to eat into too much of your afternoon. But it's so good to finally get a chance to catch up with you. I know we'd had a couple
See.
of cracks at it. So I'm glad we got the chance to do it.